Something is happening with married men right now, and most people haven't noticed it yet. But once you see it, you can't unsee it. There's a certain kind of man. Goes to work. He comes home. He mows the goes to work. He comes home. He mows the lawn on Saturday. He sits at the dinner table. He does everything a married man is supposed to do. From the outside, nothing looks different. The house is the same. The routine is the same. He's still there, still showing up, still doing his part. But something about him is different now. But if you sit with him long enough, if you get him somewhere quiet and actually get him talking honestly, he'll tell you something that stops you cold. He's not afraid of being alone anymore. Not angry, not checked out, not secretly planning to leave next Tuesday, just genuinely, quietly, completely not afraid. And that one thing, that one small internal shift, changes everything about how a marriage actually works. Because for a very long time, that fear was the engine running underneath everything. That fear was what kept him trying, when trying was hard, kept him adjusting when he didn't want to adjust, kept him coming back to the table after arguments when every part of him wanted to just go quiet and stay quiet. Remove the fear, and you remove the engine. A marriage without that engine is a completely different animal than what most couples have ever had to deal with before. So, what happened to these men? What changed them? And what does it actually mean for the marriages they're still sitting inside of? That's what we're getting into. Let me take you back about 10 or 15 years. Most married men back then had a very specific fear living in the back of their head at all times. It didn't matter how unhappy they were at home. It didn't matter how unbalanced things had gotten, how little they were getting back for everything they were putting in. The image of what life would look like alone was bigger than all of it. Picture being 52 years old, sitting alone in some apartment, eating by yourself on a Tuesday night, weekends stretching out in front of you with nothing but silence and your own thoughts. That image kept men locked in place, scared them into tolerating situations they never should have tolerated for as long as they tolerated them, scared them into swallowing things year after year because whatever was happening at home, however lopsided things had become, still felt better than that picture in their head of being alone. And the women in these marriages, not out of cruelty, not deliberately, but just naturally, understood on some level that the fear existed. Maybe they never named it out loud. Maybe they never sat down and thought about it consciously. But the dynamic was quietly built around it. He needs this more than I do right now. He won't actually leave. He has too much to lose, and he knows it. And that belief, even when it was never spoken, shaped how a lot of long marriages operated day to day. Who compromised first after a fight? Who reached out? Who adjusted their expectations? Who kept showing up emotionally even when showing up felt exhausting? The man almost always bent back toward center because the alternative, in his own mind, felt unbearable. That's just how it worked, for a long time, for a lot of marriages. But here's what started happening slowly, quietly, over the last several years. Men started actually watching other men go through it. Divorce, separation. One guy moves out, gets an apartment, starts living alone. And the men watching expected to see their friend fall apart, expected to see the devastation, the loneliness, the guy who couldn't function without the structure of home and family holding him together. That's what the fear had always promised would happen. That's the image that kept men in place. But that's not what they saw. The guy who moved out looked okay. More than okay sometimes. He looked lighter, more relaxed. Like some constant low-level pressure had been released that he'd been carrying so long he'd stopped noticing it was there. Some of them picked up things they hadn't done in years. Hobbies they'd completely set aside. Sleep they hadn't gotten properly in a decade. A quietness in their daily life that they'd forgotten was even possible. And the men watching this started thinking something they'd never allowed themselves to think before. Something small and quiet, but genuinely significant. That doesn't actually look that bad. That thought, that single thought, is where the whole thing starts to unravel. Because once a man thinks it, even once, the fear starts to crack. And a cracked fear is never the same fear again. He starts looking at his own life differently, starts measuring what he actually has versus what he was always terrified of losing. And a lot of the time when he does that math, honestly, the numbers don't add up the way he always assumed they would. And the silence he spent years dreading starts to sound like something he might actually want. The loneliness he was afraid of starts to look, from a distance, a lot like peace that just has a bad reputation. I know a guy. I'll call him Marcus. He's 54, been married 26 years. He told me something about a year ago that I keep coming back to. He said he used to have this nightmare, an actual dream while sleeping, where his wife left him and he was completely alone. And in the dream, he was devastated, couldn't eat, couldn't get himself together, just completely lost without the marriage. And that nightmare used to wake him up at 2 a.m. genuinely grateful. Grateful she was still there. Grateful the marriage was still intact. Grateful enough to go downstairs quietly, start the coffee, and find the energy to push through another day of whatever things had become at home. Then one day he realized the nightmare had stopped. He didn't know exactly when. He just noticed one morning that it had been a long time. Months, maybe. And when he tried to picture the scenario that used to terrify him, being alone, living by himself, no marriage around him, it didn't feel like a nightmare. It felt like a different life. Not a worse life, not a better one necessarily, just a different one, a possible one he could actually survive and maybe even be okay inside of. He told me that realization scared him more than the nightmare ever did, because the nightmare was keeping him engaged. Without it, he said he was just going through the motions every day, doing it out of habit, out of history, not out of anything that felt current or real or chosen. That's what I keep seeing across so many men right now. The habit is still running. The routine looks completely normal from the outside, but the emotional engine underneath it has changed, or in some cases, quietly switched off. And there's actually a real reason this happens to men at this particular stage of life and not earlier. When men are younger, in their 30s, even early 40s, there's a particular drive that pushes them forward, makes them chase, makes them work to keep things together even when things are genuinely not working. That drive pushes them to pursue, to try again, to stay in something that isn't feeding them because the need for partnership is louder than the discomfort of a bad one. That drive gradually reduces as men get older. And when it reduces, the tolerance for imbalance reduces right along with it. And what felt manageable and worth pushing through at 34 starts feeling genuinely pointless and exhausting at 53. Not because the man became bitter or difficult, because something actually shifted in how his brain weighs what things cost against what they return. At the same time, something else happens. His brain gets much better at seeing patterns honestly. When you're young, you keep thinking it'll get better. You hold on to the good moments. Not you believe your own hope, because hope is louder than evidence at that age. By the time you're in your early 50s, you've got decades of real information. Not potential. Not what things could be if everything aligned. What they actually are, consistently, year after year. And a brain with that much data stops saying, maybe it'll change. It starts saying, I know exactly what this is. And once a man genuinely knows what something is, the fear of losing it changes shape completely. Here's the part that's uncomfortable to say out loud, but needs to be said. When the fear leaves a married man, the power inside the relationship shifts. And it shifts faster than either person realizes. Because most of the quiet negotiating that happens inside a long marriage, who reaches out after conflict, who adjusts, who compromises, who keeps the temperature manageable, most of that has been running on one person needing the relationship more than the other. Take away his need, and you take away his automatic compliance. Not as a strategy, not because he decided to play it differently, he just genuinely stops doing things he used to do on instinct, because the fear that triggered those things isn't sending the signal, and the woman on the other side of this usually feels something shift before she understands what it is. She just notices he's different. He doesn't react to tension the way he used to. He doesn't push to fix things after a disagreement with the same urgency. He's comfortable sitting in silence in a way that feels unfamiliar. He seems harder to read. She might think he's depressed. She might think something happened that he's not telling her. She might get genuinely frustrated that he's not engaging the way he always engaged before. What she's actually feeling is him, without the fear underneath, and she has possibly never experienced him that way in the entire marriage. The fear was always there, quietly running, shaping how he moved toward her. Without it, he moves differently. He's still there, but the lean is gone. I know another guy. I'll call him Paul, 61 years old. His wife came to him frustrated about 6 months ago. told him she felt like he didn't care anymore, that he was somewhere else, even when he was physically present, that something had changed and she needed to know what it was. And Paul told me he sat there listening to her and knew she wasn't wrong. Something had changed, but not the way she was describing it. He used to track her moods without thinking about it. Know when she was getting irritated before she said a word. Adjust the way he was talking. Adjust what he was doing. Manage the emotional temperature of the room so things wouldn't escalate. He did it automatically for years. It was just what he did. And then gradually, without any conscious decision, he stopped doing it. Not because he stopped caring, because the low-level anxiety that made him track and manage and pre-adjust had gone quiet on its own. His wife felt that as him pulling away. What it actually was him sitting at neutral for the first time. But they'd spent so many years with him operating just slightly anxious, just slightly vigilant, always leaning toward managing things, that neutral looked like coldness to her. Used to move toward you, feels like they're used to move toward you, feels like they're moving away. Now here's what people almost always get wrong when they look at this from the outside. This is not men giving up on marriage. Most of the men sitting in this place are still there, still willing to be in it, still capable of real connection. What changed is the version of themselves they're bringing to it. They're not performing anymore, not managing, not shrinking themselves to keep the temperature comfortable, not apologizing for things they're not actually sorry about, not reaching out first every single time just to avoid the discomfort of distance. They're just being who they actually are. And they're waiting, maybe for the first time ever in the marriage, to find out if who they actually are is enough. If the real version of them, without all the fear-driven effort stacked on top, is something their partner genuinely wants to be around. On him overextending, on him bridging gaps, on him overextending, on him bridging gaps that shouldn't have been entirely his to bridge, on him compensating quietly for years, because the fear made compensation feel worth it. Take the effort away, and what you have left is just two real people with no buffer between them. And two real people with no fear and no performance holding the structure together have to actually want each other, not need, not habit, not shared history or shared kids or shared property. Actually want. Choose each other on purpose, clearly, without the fear making the choice for them. A lot of couples, when they arrive at that, find out they've been running almost entirely on need for longer than either of them wants to admit. I know a guy, I'll call him Derek, 58 years old. He told me about a moment about 2 years ago that he thinks about almost every day. He and his wife were sitting in the living room together on a Sunday afternoon, both of them on their phones. No conversation, nothing hostile, nothing tense, just quiet. And he looked up and watched her for a minute, and he had this thought that came completely calmly, without drama attached to it at all. He thought, I don't know if I actually like her. Not love. He said that question felt more complicated. Just basic everyday liking. The kind where you look at someone and want to know what they're thinking. Want to start a conversation just because you're curious about them. He couldn't remember the last time he'd felt that. Not the last time he'd loved her in some historical sense. The last time he'd actually wanted to talk to her. Just wanted to. Not needed to. Not felt like he should. Wanted to. He put his phone down and went to bed without saying anything. And lying there in the dark, what surprised him wasn't the thought. It was that he felt completely calm having it. No panic, no sadness, no urgency to fix it or explain it or reach out and close the distance. Just clear. And clarity without pain attached to it told him something very specific about exactly where he was inside the marriage. That's the whole shift described in one moment. Not explosive, not dramatic, just clear and calm and completely unafraid. So what does this actually mean going forward? What does it mean for relationships when more and more married men are sitting quietly in this place? It means the foundation that a lot of long marriages were built on, maybe without either person ever consciously acknowledging it, is no longer stable. If his fear was holding a particular dynamic in place, and the fear is gone, the dynamic has to become something different. Either the relationship grows into something both people actually choose every day, not out of fear, not out of habit, not out of everything they've already invested, but because they genuinely want it. Or it hollows out slowly and quietly until one ordinary day something completely small tips it over and the whole thing finally says out loud, what it's been saying quietly for years. For the women in these marriages, it means the thing they may have been quietly relying on without ever naming it is no longer there to rely on. His fear, his need, his willingness to always be the one who came back first, no matter what. That's not operating it, and that changes what both people have to bring to keep the marriage real. You can't keep running the same dynamic when one person is no longer afraid. When neither person is afraid, everything has to be chosen, actively, on purpose, every day. Not from fear of what leaving looks like, but from genuinely wanting what staying feels like. That's harder than it sounds, significantly harder, because fear is actually an incredibly efficient motivator. It works without either person having to think about it. Remove it, and you need something genuine to replace it. Not obligation, not the kids, not 25 years of shared history. Something real and current that makes a 56-year-old man look up from whatever he's doing and actually want to be where he is. Some marriages will find that. Some couples will look at each other once the fear and the performance and the compensation are all stripped away and find something they actually like underneath it all. Something honest, something they can choose clearly and consciously. And those marriages will be stronger than they've ever been because they'll finally be built on something real. But a lot of marriages won't find it. They'll look at each other without all the protective layers and realize the layers were doing most of the work. And they'll have to figure out honestly what to do with that. The men who are already in this place, sitting inside marriages without the fear running quietly underneath everything, most of them aren't going anywhere tomorrow. They're not impatient. They're not building towards some dramatic exit. They're just still, watching, waiting to see if the relationship can meet them where they actually are now. Not where their anxiety used to drag them. Not where 20 years of habit says they should stand. Where they actually are today. And that stillness, that calm and completely unafraid waiting, is one of the most serious things a marriage can face. Because a man who was afraid would always break the silence. He'd reach out before reaching out was really warranted. He'd apologize to end the distance even when the apology wasn't honest. He'd try again before trying had actually been earned. A man without the fear just waits. And he is genuinely okay with however long the quiet stretches. Because the thing he spent years being most afraid of, being alone, being without the marriage, sitting in a quiet apartment with just himself for company, turns out to be something he can handle. Something that doesn't scare him the way it used to. And once a man knows that, not just says it, but actually feels it, in a calm and ordinary moment, the relationship he's in has to earn him in a way it never had to before. That's the shift. That's what's sitting quietly inside a lot of marriages right now. Not in the arguments, not in the dramatic moments, in the still ones, in the Sunday afternoons, in the car rides where nobody talks, in the evenings where two people sit in the same room and one of them is no longer afraid of what it would mean if the room only had one person in it. That's what changed. And the marriages that figure out what to do with that change, the ones that build something real on the other side of the fear, those are the ones worth watching.